The quiet hum of the old refrigerator was often the loudest sound in Eleanor Vance's small, secluded cottage. Dinner was a ritual, as predictable as the ticking grandfather clock in the hall, a small, carefully portioned meal, eaten alone at the chipped oak table. The cutlery, echoing faintly against the ceramic plate, seemed to amplify the vast silence that filled the rooms. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak afternoon sun that pierced the lace curtains, illuminating the stillness, the quiet dignity of a life lived largely in solitude. The air, despite the warmth of the fading light, held a subtle chill, a loneliness that seemed to cling to the antique furniture and the faded photographs on the mantelpiece, each one a whisper of a life once shared, now gone. Eleanor, at 72, moved with a deliberate slowness, her joints protesting the damp Vietnamese winters. Her days were a tapestry woven with simple, repetitive tasks, tending to her small patch of herbs, reading by the window, listening to the crackle of the radio. Her children, grown and scattered, called infrequently, their voices tinny and distant, filled with well-meaning but often abstract concerns. She appreciated their calls, but they underscored the quiet reality of her present. A life lived on the fringes, independent but isolated. There was a stoic acceptance in her demeanor, a quiet resignation to the passage of time, and the inevitable solitude that came with it. Yet, beneath this placid surface lay a hidden current of fear, the fear of true vulnerability, of needing help and finding no one there, of the frailty that inevitably accompanied old age. The local animal shelter, Happy Tales, was something Eleanor usually avoided. The thought of all those desperate, hopeful eyes, the cacophony of barks and meows was overwhelming. She preferred her quiet, predictable world. But a few weeks prior, Mrs. Leon, her kind-hearted neighbor who occasionally brought her fresh vegetables, had commented, "Eleanor, you know, a little companion might do you good. My sister got a rescue dog, brightened her whole house right up." The words had lingered, an unexpected seed planted in the fertile ground of Eleanor's quiet loneliness. One dreary Tuesday afternoon, driven by a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps a deeper, unspoken yearning, Eleanor found herself walking down the gravel path towards Happy Tales. The smell of disinfectant and damp fur hit her first, followed by the chorus of barks and whines. Inside, the main kennels were bustling. Families with eager children pointed at boisterous puppies. Teenagers cooed over playful adolescents, all drawn to the energetic, perfect dogs. Eleanor moved slowly, observing the joyous chaos, a quiet observer in a world she felt increasingly disconnected from. Then, she saw him. Tucked away in a small, out-of-the-way cage, separate from the larger, more appealing puppies, was a tiny, scruffy little dog. He was undeniably small, even for a puppy, his paws seemingly too big for his spindly legs, his ears comically large for his head. He shivered slightly, a nervous tremble, as if constantly anticipating rejection. Around him, larger, fluffier, more conventionally cute puppies bounced and barked, vying for attention. But this one, with his big, soulful brown eyes, seemed to possess a quiet resignation, an almost profound sadness. He wasn't barking, wasn't jumping. He was simply watching, a silent, hopeful plea in his gaze. A young volunteer, bustling past with a clipboard, noticed Eleanor's prolonged gaze. "Oh, that one," she said, her voice tinged with a faint weariness. "That's Pip. He's a bit small and quiet. We've had trouble finding him a home. People usually want bigger, more active dogs. He's been here a while. We call him the runt of the litter, bless his heart." The words, though meant kindly, carried the weight of a dismissive judgment, highlighting Pip's perceived inadequacies. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang in her chest. Too small. Quiet. Runt. The words resonated with a strange familiarity, echoing a lifetime of feeling overlooked, of being told she was too sensitive, too quiet, too old to bother with. In Pip's sad, expectant eyes, Eleanor saw a reflection of her own quiet loneliness, her own unspoken yearning for connection. He wasn't boisterous or demanding. He was simply there, a tiny, vulnerable soul reaching out in silence. As other potential adopters walked past Pip's cage, Barely sparing him a glance, drawn instead to the more exuberant puppies, Eleanor felt a curious pull. A family with two boisterous children, eager for a playful companion, stopped briefly, peered at Pip, and then moved on, the father murmuring, "Two small kids. We need something that can keep up." A young couple, looking for a dog to run with, dismissed him with a casual wave. Pip seemed to shrink further into his corner, his tail, if it could even be called that, tucked even tighter between his legs. Each dismissal seemed to chip away at the little dog's already fragile hope, reinforcing the silent judgment of his perceived inadequacy. The volunteers, while caring, inadvertently contributed to this narrative, often emphasizing Pip's small size to manage expectations, unwittingly highlighting the very trait that made him seem unadoptable. Eleanor, however, found herself drawn to his quiet strength, the way he watched the world with an intensity that belied his small stature. There was a flicker of something in his deep brown eyes, a spark of intelligence, and perhaps a hidden resilience. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but Eleanor, with her years of observing the quiet nuances of life, noticed it. It was a keen awareness, an almost preternatural sensitivity to his surroundings, as if his small body compensated with heightened senses. It was a glint of something deeper, something beyond mere puppy cuteness, a nascent wisdom in those two large eyes. Eleanor, a woman who rarely trusted her own impulses, felt an inexplicable connection, a quiet stirring in her heart that she hadn't felt in years. A whisper of a feeling, a vague sense of a promise unfulfilled in her own life, seemed to latch onto the little dog. As the afternoon waned, Eleanor remained by Pip's cage, watching him. The volunteer had gone to help another family, leaving Eleanor and the small dog in their shared bubble of quiet contemplation. Pip, sensing her continued presence, slowly, tentatively, inched closer to the bars of his cage. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply rested his chin on the cold wire, his big eyes fixed on her, a silent, hopeful plea that cut through Eleanor's lifelong reserve. Eleanor reached out a tentative finger, letting it rest on the cool metal bars. Pip, instead of recoiling, slowly, cautiously, licked her fingertip through the wire. It was a tiny gesture, barely a touch, but it sent a warmth spreading through Eleanor's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in decades. It was a direct, unmediated connection, a silent conversation between two solitary souls. "He's very quiet," Eleanor murmured to herself, her voice a little rough with disuse, yet surprisingly tender. She felt a surge of protectiveness, an unfamiliar urge to shield this tiny, overlooked creature from a world that seemed determined to dismiss him. A strange, unbidden thought formed in her mind. Perhaps, just perhaps, this small, quiet dog was exactly what she needed. Perhaps in saving him, she could save a part of herself too. It was a bold, impulsive thought for a woman who lived by routine, but the feeling was undeniable. A gentle but insistent tug at her heart. The quiet life, she realized, was perhaps not truly living. And in Pip's vulnerable gaze, she saw a chance to add a new, unpredictable chapter to her own story, a chapter that promised connection, purpose, and perhaps a touch of unexpected magic. The air in the Happy Tales animal shelter, usually thick with the chorus of barking and the hopeful whimpers of abandoned animals, seemed to quiet around Eleanor Vance and the tiny puppy named Pip. Eleanor's finger, still lightly touching Pip's cold wire cage, felt an unexpected warmth spread through her, a fragile connection that defied logic. This wasn't the kind of interaction she was used to. Her life had been one of quiet, solitary routines, punctuated by the occasional distant phone call from her children. The thought of bringing a new, unpredictable life into her meticulously ordered existence filled her with a familiar anxiety, a ripple of doubt that ran through her like a shiver. "Are you thinking of adopting him, ma'am?" The young volunteer, Sarah, reappeared beside Eleanor, clipboard still in hand, her eyes kind but slightly tired. "Pip is a sweet boy, really. Just a bit fragile. He needs a lot of care." Her words, meant to be helpful, inadvertently reinforced Eleanor's own fears. A fragile puppy, at her age. It felt like an immense responsibility, a commitment she wasn't sure she was prepared to make. Her mind, ever practical, conjured images of spilled water bowls, chewed slippers, and the endless energy a puppy demanded. Could she, a woman whose movements were now slow and deliberate, truly keep up? The question swirled, threatening to extinguish the fragile spark of connection Pip had ignited. Eleanor hesitated, her gaze drifting from Pip's hopeful eyes to the bustling activity of the other kennels. She saw a young family laughing as a golden retriever puppy enthusiastically licked their faces. A fit couple jogged past with a sleek, athletic greyhound. These were the easy adoptions, the perfect fits. Pip, small and unassuming, seemed to fade into the background, a silent, almost invisible presence. The thought of him remaining in that cage, passed over again and again, twisted something in Eleanor's chest. It was the same feeling she sometimes got when looking at her own reflection, a sense of being overlooked, of growing smaller and less significant with each passing year. Then, Pip whimpered. It was a tiny sound, barely audible above the general din of the shelter, but it resonated with Eleanor. He shifted slightly in his cage, pressing his small nose against the wire, his big, mournful eyes fixed solely on her. In that moment, Eleanor saw not just a fragile puppy, but a reflection of her own profound loneliness, a mirror of the unspoken yearning she carried deep within her. He wasn't begging for attention like the others. He was simply there, waiting, offering a quiet, unconditional promise of companionship. It was a silent plea, but it was also a profound invitation. A flash of memory, unexpected and sharp, cut through Eleanor's hesitation. She remembered a small, wilting rosebush in her garden, overlooked by her gardener, left to fend for itself. Most people would have let it die, too much trouble for too little reward. But Eleanor, with a quiet stubbornness that few recognized, had carefully nursed it back to health, watering it daily, pruning its thorns, protecting it from the harsh winter winds. And when it finally bloomed, a single, exquisite crimson rose, its beauty was all the more profound because of its difficult journey. That stubborn, resilient rose was a quiet testament to her own enduring spirit, a part of herself she often forgot. This was Eleanor's save the cat moment. In a life that had increasingly become about accepting limitations and receding from the world, this was a small, courageous act of outreach, a defiant gesture against the creeping tide of loneliness. It was a spontaneous decision, unburdened by the usual practicalities and fears that governed her life. Her compassion, a deep well she rarely drew from for herself, overflowed for this small, overlooked creature. She saw beyond his small stature, beyond the volunteer's gentle warnings, and recognized a kindred spirit. "I'll take him," Eleanor heard herself say, the words surprising even herself. They came out stronger, more resolute than she had anticipated. She watched as a flicker of surprise, then pure, unadulterated joy, lit up Pip's mournful eyes. He gave a tiny, almost silent bark, a puff of air, and wagged his ridiculously small tail, a hesitant, hopeful flutter that sent another wave of warmth through her. Sarah, the volunteer, looked genuinely delighted. "Oh, that's wonderful, ma'am. He's a special little guy. I knew someone would see it." She quickly began the paperwork, her pen scratching against the clipboard, her movements imbued with a renewed energy. The adoption process was surprisingly swift. Eleanor signed the papers, her hand steady, a faint sense of purpose bubbling up within her. Pip, now officially hers, was placed in a small carrier. As they walked out of the bustling shelter into the cool, crisp afternoon air, Eleanor felt a lightness in her step she hadn't experienced in years. The weight of loneliness, which had settled upon her like a familiar cloak, seemed to lift, replaced by a tentative, exhilarating sense of anticipation. The drive home was quiet, save for the occasional soft whimper from the carrier beside her. Eleanor glanced over, a small smile playing on her lips. Pip. Her Pip. He was undeniably small, probably even smaller than she had initially thought. His breath misted faintly on the inside of the carrier, a tiny, precious cloud of life. The realization that she was now responsible for this fragile creature, for his well-being, for his very existence, was both daunting and profoundly exhilarating. It was a new chapter, an unwritten story, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a spark of genuine curiosity about what lay ahead. Back at the cottage, the familiar silence of the house felt different, almost expectant. Eleanor placed the carrier gently on the floor of her living room and unlatched the door. Pip, hesitant at first, slowly, cautiously emerged. He took a few wobbly steps, sniffing the worn rug, his tiny nose twitching with curiosity. He looked around the quiet, antique-filled room, then up at Eleanor, his big eyes wide and full of trust. This was the point of no return. With Pip's tentative steps into her home, Eleanor's solitary existence had been irrevocably altered. The quiet routines, the predictable days, the comforting isolation, all of it was now infused with the unpredictable energy of a new, small life. She had opened her door, not just to a puppy, but to a vast, unknown territory of companionship, responsibility, and perhaps an unexpected adventure. Pip was a tiny, furry anchor to a future that felt suddenly less lonely, less predictable, and infinitely more hopeful. The cold, quiet house, once a testament to her solitude, now held the promise of warmth, life, and the soft pitter-patter of tiny paws. Eleanor Vance and Pip. Their journey, born from loneliness and an unlikely act of compassion, had truly just begun. The echoes of the ticking clock still filled the room, but now, Eleanor imagined, they would be joined by the soft breathing of a loyal companion. The quiet hum of the old refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in Eleanor Vance's cottage now had a new, softer counterpoint. The gentle thump-thump-thump of a tiny tail wagging against the worn rug. Pip's arrival had not been a sudden explosion of chaos, but rather a slow, subtle infiltration of life into Eleanor's meticulously ordered world. The initial days were a delicate dance of adjustment. Eleanor, accustomed to solitude, found herself talking aloud more, murmuring encouragement to Pip as he explored every nook and cranny of his new home, his small body a blur of excited energy, his nose twitching with endless curiosity. Pip, for his part, was not like the boisterous, demanding puppies Eleanor had seen at Happy Tales. He was observant, almost preternaturally so. He rarely barked without reason, preferring to communicate through soft whimpers, nudges, or insistent pawing. He quickly learned Eleanor's routines, often sitting patiently by the kitchen door at mealtimes, or curling up at her feet when she settled into her armchair for her afternoon reading. But beneath this charming, gentle demeanor, there was something else, something unusual, a keen awareness that Eleanor began to notice. It started with small things, easily dismissed as coincidence. One crisp morning, Eleanor had placed a kettle on the stove for her tea, then wandered off to water her herbs, momentarily forgetting about it. Suddenly, Pip, who had been dozing by the hearth, sprang to life. He began to bark, a sharp, insistent series of yaps, unlike his usual soft sounds. He nudged her ankles repeatedly, then darted towards the kitchen, looking back at her with wide, frantic eyes. Eleanor, annoyed by the interruption to her quiet contemplation, followed him, only to find the kettle boiling furiously, water spitting onto the gas flame, threatening to extinguish it and fill the kitchen with gas. A shiver ran down her spine. "Goodness, Pip," she murmured, turning off the burner. "You're a noisy little thing today." She patted his head, dismissing it as a fluke. A few days later, Eleanor was struggling to open a stubborn jar of preserves. Her arthritic hands ached with the effort. Pip, who had been playing with a chew toy, suddenly stopped. He nudged her hand, then began to whine, a low, distressed sound, looking intently at the top shelf of the pantry. Eleanor, confused, looked up. There, precariously balanced on the very edge, was a stack of old, heavy cookbooks. One slight tremor from her straining effort, and they would have toppled, perhaps onto her head. Eleanor stared at Pip, then at the books. It was another strange moment, one that made her pause. These incidents, minor as they seemed, accumulated. Pip would sometimes sit by the window, hackles slightly raised, giving a low growl moments before an unexpected gust of wind rattled the panes. He would nudge her away from a loose floorboard she hadn't noticed. He even managed to warn her of a squirrel that had somehow squeezed through a tiny gap in the kitchen window and was attempting to raid her cookie jar, his frantic barks and pointing nose drawing her attention to the furry culprit. Eleanor, a woman of logic and practicality, initially dismissed these as mere luck or overly vivid imagination. Just a clever little fellow, she'd tell herself, even as a tiny seed of wonder began to sprout in her mind. Her children, when they called, inadvertently reinforced this dismissal, becoming the misguided supporters of this quiet, growing mystery. Her daughter, Clara, called one afternoon, her voice a warm but slightly patronizing hum over the phone. "How's that little dog, Mother? Not causing too much trouble, I hope? You know, those tiny breeds can be rather delicate. Are you sure you're up to the responsibility?" Clara's concern, while genuine, carried an underlying current of doubt about Eleanor's capabilities, both in handling a troublesome pet and managing her own aging life. "Oh, Pip's just fine, dear," Eleanor would reply, her voice a little too breezy. She found herself hesitant to share the peculiar incidents, fearing Clara would simply attribute them to an old woman's fanciful imagination, or worse, see them as proof that Eleanor was becoming forgetful or unwell. The subtle, almost dismissive tone of her children always managed to make Eleanor feel a slight shame, a need to downplay the true bond forming with Pip, to minimize his intelligence, to conform to their preconceived notions of her aging self. But the bond between Eleanor and Pip was deepening, transforming her once solitary existence. Pip was always there, a warm, soft presence, a quiet confidant. Eleanor began to rely on his unique cues, though she didn't quite understand them. His subtle shifts in posture, the nuanced tones of his whimpers, the almost human intensity in his gaze. She was learning to interpret them. It was a language without words, a bond forged in shared silence and uncanny understanding. She started to understand that Pip wasn't just reacting to obvious threats. He seemed to sense subtle shifts in air currents, minute changes in scent, almost imperceptible vibrations that hinted at impending danger. It was as if his small size, his physical vulnerability, had been compensated by an extraordinary, almost supernatural sensitivity to the world around him. He wasn't just a pet, he was a living barometer, acutely tuned to the unseen forces that shaped their isolated existence. One evening, as a fierce wind rattled the window panes, promising a cold night, Eleanor noticed Pip pacing restlessly by the old wood-burning stove. He usually loved to curl up there, basking in its warmth. But tonight, he seemed agitated, sniffing the air repeatedly, then looking up at the chimney with a low, worried whine. Eleanor, feeling a slight draft, dismissed it. The chimney had been cleaned last year, but Pip persisted, whimpering and nudging her towards the firebox. Eleanor, now accustomed to his unusual prompts, decided to humor him. She opened the heavy iron door of the stove and peered inside, shining a flashlight up the flue. To her alarm, a small, loose brick, dislodged by the recent winds, was precariously balanced, threatening to fall and block the chimney. Had it fallen while the fire was lit, it could have caused smoke to back up into the house, or worse, sparked a dangerous chimney fire. Eleanor gasped. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. This was Pip, acting as a silent sentinel, a guardian angel in miniature. A profound realization dawned on Eleanor. Pip wasn't just a puppy. He was a creature of remarkable intuition, an uncanny ability to sense danger before it manifested, a silent warning system that operated beyond human comprehension. He was her guardian, her constant protector, his small size masking an immense, unexpected power. The trust between them solidified into an unshakable bond. Eleanor no longer merely cared for Pip. She relied on him, respected his instincts, and cherished his unique wisdom. She started to see him not as too small or fragile, but as a small package of immense perception and unwavering loyalty. The gentle touch of his paw, the soft nudge of his nose, the keen intelligence in his eyes, these were the true revelations of their shared life, the unfolding of a secret talent that few would ever believe. The old cottage, once a monument to her solitude, now hummed with the quiet, symbiotic rhythm of two souls, one old and one young, both once overlooked, now deeply, inexplicably connected, ready to face whatever the world might throw at them, together. Eleanor, for the first time in years, felt truly and completely safe, protected by her tiny, whispering presence. The crisp autumn air that had been a gentle companion to Eleanor Vance and Pip for weeks suddenly turned vicious. Gray, bruised clouds gathered on the horizon, swelling with an ominous speed that belied the stillness on the ground. By late afternoon, the first fat snowflakes began to fall, swirling lazily at first, then thickening into a relentless, blinding curtain of white. The wind, a mournful howl, whipped through the towering pines surrounding Eleanor's secluded cottage, tearing at the branches, transforming the familiar landscape into a stark, unforgiving wilderness. Eleanor, accustomed to the unpredictable whims of nature in her isolated home, moved with practiced efficiency, closing the storm shutters, bringing in a small stack of firewood. Pip, usually a playful dart of energy, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. He stayed close to her heels, his small body pressed against her ankles, a low, anxious whine rumbling in his chest. His keen senses, honed by a life of cautious observation, picked up on the subtle changes long before Eleanor did. The deeper vibration of the wind, the sharp scent of an approaching cold front, the muffled quiet that descended upon the world as the snow intensified. By early evening, the storm had fully erupted. The wind shrieked like a banshee, rattling the old window panes with violent force. Snow piled against the doors, burying the porch and turning the world outside into an impenetrable white wall. Then, with a sudden, sickening groan, the lights flickered, dimmed, and plunged the cottage into an inky blackness. The old house, usually a sanctuary of warmth and light, became a vast, echoing void, illuminated only by the faint, shifting glow from the dying embers in the wood stove. Eleanor sighed, a familiar weariness settling over her. Power outages were not uncommon during severe storms, but this one felt different. The darkness was absolute, heavy, pressing in on her, emphasizing her profound solitude. She fumbled for the box of matches on the mantelpiece, her fingers stiff with cold, and lit a few candles, their small flames casting dancing shadows that exaggerated the looming shapes of her furniture. The comforting hum of the refrigerator was gone, replaced by the howl of the wind and the unsettling creaks and groans of the old house. "Well, Pip," she murmured, her voice thin in the sudden silence. "Looks like it's just you and me for a while." Pip whined softly, pressing his small head into her leg, a comforting, warm presence in the vast, intimidating darkness. Eleanor managed a weak smile, finding a surprising solace in his silent companionship. She knew calling for help was futile. The roads would be impassable, the phone lines likely down. She was utterly alone, isolated by the fury of the storm, dependent only on her own dwindling reserves and the instincts of her tiny companion. This old cottage, her refuge for so many years, now became her gauntlet, the symbolic arena for a looming, unseen threat. It was a space that had always represented safety and predictability, but now it transformed into a claustrophobic trap, where every creak and groan of the storm-battered house seemed to whisper of unseen dangers. As the night wore on, the temperature inside the house began to drop. Eleanor wrapped herself in a thick woolen blanket, huddling closer to the wood stove, the last source of warmth. Pip, curled in a tight ball at her feet, trembled slightly, not just from the cold, but from something else. He was sniffing the air with an obsessive intensity, his tiny nose twitching, his breath coming in shallow, rapid gasps. He kept lifting his head, his ears swiveling, trying to pinpoint a scent, a sound, that eluded Eleanor's aging senses. Eleanor, drifting into a restless sleep, dimly registered Pip's increasing agitation. He began to stir, whimpering softly, then pawing insistently at her blanket. "Oh, Pip, darling," she mumbled, half asleep. "Just settle down. It's too cold to play." She reached out a hand, intending to stroke his head, to soothe him. But Pip wasn't easily deterred. He let out a sharp, urgent bark, then another, and another, his small body wriggling furiously, nudging her, trying to pull at her blanket with his teeth. His barks, usually reserved for unusual occurrences, were now sharp, distressed cries, echoing the growing panic that seized his tiny heart. A faint, almost imperceptible scent began to prickle at Eleanor's nostrils. It was subtle at first, masked by the lingering aroma of wood smoke and the mustiness of the old house. But as Pip's frantic barks intensified, growing more desperate, the scent became clearer. A faint, acrid smell, like something burning, something deep within the walls. Suddenly, a terrifying realization dawned on Eleanor. The smell wasn't just lingering smoke. It was smoke, and it was growing stronger, but the wood stove was almost out and the power was off. Where could it be coming from? Her heart lurched. She forced herself to sit upright, blinking into the oppressive darkness. The air felt thick, heavy, carrying a subtle, sickening warmth that was entirely unnatural. She inhaled deeply, and the acrid scent hit her fully, a harsh chemical tang that scorched her throat. Her eyes, still adjusting to the darkness, could make out nothing beyond the immediate vicinity of her candles. But the oppressive heat, the growing smoke, the desperate, unceasing barks of Pip, it all converged into a single terrifying truth. A fire. An unseen, silent threat was consuming her home, spreading from within the walls, fueled by an electrical short or an overheated, forgotten wire. The power outage, initially a minor inconvenience, had become a deadly trap, concealing the immediate danger. Eleanor's 72 years suddenly weighed heavily upon her. Her mind, still groggy from sleep and the shock, struggled to comprehend the full extent of the danger. She was in her bedroom, a room usually a haven of rest, now becoming a smoke-filled furnace. The smoke, thin and insidious at first, was quickly thickening, coiling in the air, making it difficult to breathe. A terrifying panic began to rise within her, a cold, paralyzing grip. She was alone, isolated by the storm, and her home, her sanctuary, was being silently devoured. The clock was ticking, a silent, invisible countdown to disaster. Every second that passed, the fire grew, inching closer, devouring more of the old wood. The warmth in the room was no longer comforting. It was a creeping, suffocating heat that promised annihilation. The glow of the candles flickered erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her helplessness. Pip, sensing her dawning terror, became a whirlwind of frantic action. He was no longer just barking. He was whimpering, whining, and literally trying to drag her off the bed by tugging at her nightgown with his teeth, his small body a vibrating coil of desperate urgency. He leapt onto her chest, his tiny paws batting at her face, his nose nudging her chin, forcing her to fully awaken, to fully understand. He was pushing her, urging her to move, to escape. Eleanor's eyes, burning from the smoke, finally focused on Pip, his small, desperate face silhouetted against the faint glow from the hallway. In his eyes, she saw not just panic, but a fierce, unwavering determination. He wasn't running away, he was fighting for her. Her little, fragile dog, dismissed as too small, was now her only hope, her only guide in the suffocating darkness and the rising heat. The test had arrived, silent and terrifying, and she was utterly alone to face it, with only the desperate guidance of her unlikely companion. The acrid smell of smoke now filled the air, thick and choking, tearing at Eleanor's throat. Her lungs burned with every shallow gasp, and her eyes, watering profusely, struggled to make sense of the oppressive darkness. The soft glow of the candles flickered wildly, casting grotesque dancing shadows that stretched and warped the familiar furniture into menacing shapes. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at Eleanor's mind, threatening to overwhelm her. She was disoriented, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But Pip was a force of unwavering, desperate will. He was no longer just barking. His small body was a furious engine of frantic motion. He launched himself at Eleanor's nightgown, tugging with surprising strength, his tiny teeth gripping the fabric as he tried to drag her off the bed. He whined, a high-pitched, insistent plea, then darted towards the bedroom door, looking back at her with wide, desperate eyes that glowed faintly in the gloom, urging her to follow. When she didn't move fast enough, a wave of dizziness washing over her, he scrambled back, jumping onto her chest, his tiny paws batting at her face, his nose nudging her chin, forcing her to fully awaken, to fully understand the immediate, overwhelming danger. "Fire," Eleanor rasped, the word a dry, terrified whisper. The reality crashed over her with the force of a physical blow. She could feel the heat radiating from the walls, an insidious warmth that was quickly becoming unbearable. Her limbs, stiff with age and fear, felt like lead. She struggled to sit up, pushing herself off the bed, her feet fumbling for the floor. The familiar layout of her bedroom, her safe haven for decades, had transformed into a treacherous maze in the smoky darkness. This was Eleanor's breath-holding moment. Every second stretched into an eternity. The smoke thickened, swirling around her like an unholy fog, stealing her breath, blurring her vision. She could hear a faint crackling sound now, a sinister whisper from somewhere deep within the walls, growing louder, closer. The initial terror threatened to paralyze her completely. She took a step, then stumbled, bumping into her dresser, sending a small ceramic vase crashing to the floor with a loud shatter. The noise seemed to echo the shattering of her composure. She was lost, disoriented, the exit seemingly miles away through the suffocating darkness. Just then, a faint, angry orange glow flickered from beneath the doorframe, growing brighter, hungrier. The fire, no longer a silent threat, was announcing its presence with a terrifying roar. The light cast grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the rising smoke and the horrifying reality of her predicament. Eleanor gasped, a strangled cry escaping her lips as she saw the ominous light, the tangible proof of the inferno consuming her home. Her mind screamed for escape, but her body felt leaden, her sense of direction utterly lost in the chaos. But Pip, her tiny hero, did not falter. He didn't run, didn't cower. Instead, with an astonishing burst of courage that defied his small stature, he sprang into action. He was a small furry missile, leaping off the bed and landing squarely at Eleanor's feet. He nudged her ankles insistently. Then, with desperate determination, he began to pull at the hem of her nightgown, his teeth gripping the fabric, trying to guide her towards the door. When she faltered, he would stop, look back, and let out a sharp, urgent bark, then pull again, his whole tiny body straining with effort. "Pip!" Eleanor coughed, the smoke burning her throat. "Which way?" Without hesitation, Pip darted forward, his tiny form a blur in the smoky darkness, then stopped directly in front of the bedroom door, pawing at it furiously, then looking back at Eleanor, his eyes gleaming with fierce urgency. He was pointing the way. He was leading her. Driven by a surge of desperate hope and an almost childlike trust in her small companion, Eleanor stumbled forward, following the insistent pull of his tiny body. She kept one hand on the wall, her fingers brushing against the rough plaster, trying to maintain her balance in the oppressive darkness. Pip continued to lead, a small, furry compass. He would pause at obstacles, a fallen lamp, a displaced rug, nudging Eleanor's feet around them, or letting out a short, sharp bark to warn her of unseen dangers. He even pushed her foot away from a hot spot on the floorboards, a hidden ember burning through the wood. The heat was becoming intense, searing her skin. The crackling sounds grew into a furious roar, a hungry beast devouring her home. Splinters of light, angry red and orange, began to pierce through cracks in the walls, illuminating the thick, black smoke that filled the air. Eleanor could feel the floorboards growing warm beneath her bare feet. They reached the living room, now a terrifying inferno. Flames licked at the curtains, danced across the old wooden beams, and consumed the beloved antique furniture. The air was a suffocating fiery haze. Eleanor choked, tears streaming down her face, her eyes squeezed shut against the heat and smoke. She could feel her strength failing, her legs threatening to give out. But Pip, with a burst of frantic energy, pulled harder. He somehow seemed to find the strength of a much larger dog, dragging her across the burning living room, bypassing crumbling bookshelves and collapsing chairs. He never wavered, never stopped. He was a miniature beacon of courage, a tiny, defiant spark against the raging inferno. He propelled her forward, towards the faint, beckoning light of the front door. Finally, with a last desperate surge of adrenaline, Eleanor stumbled through the front door, collapsing onto the snow-covered porch, gasping for air. Pip, still pulling at her nightgown, managed to drag her a few more feet away from the porch, into the relative safety of the snow, then collapsed against her, panting, his small body trembling from exertion and fear. Eleanor lay there, coughing uncontrollably, the cold, fresh air a painful balm to her burning lungs. She looked back at her home. The cottage, her sanctuary for decades, was now a raging inferno, flames leaping from the windows, devouring the roof, painting the night sky with a terrifying apocalyptic glow. The old wooden walls groaned and shrieked as they succumbed to the hungry flames. Just then, The wail of a distant siren pierced the night, growing louder, closer. A neighbor, awakened by the ominous glow in the sky, had seen the fire and called for help. Flashing red and blue lights soon appeared through the swirling snow, growing rapidly larger. Eleanor, her body shaking from shock and exhaustion, managed to lift her trembling arm and pull Pip close. He nestled into her embrace, his small heart pounding against hers. She buried her face in his soft fur, tears of gratitude, relief, and profound awe mingling on his small head. Her tiny, too small dog, the one rejected by so many, the one she had chosen out of quiet compassion, had just saved her life in the most unimaginable way. He had led her through the terrifying gauntlet of fire and smoke, a true hero in miniature. As the first fire trucks arrived, their sirens screaming, lights flashing, a few bundled-up figures emerged from the swirling snow. A neighbor, a local volunteer. They saw Eleanor, huddled on the snow, safe, but her home engulfed in flames. Then they saw Pip, curled protectively in her arms, his small body a testament to unwavering loyalty and courage. The reactions of the witnesses were immediate and profound. The neighbor, old Mrs. Davies, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and relief. "Eleanor! Oh, thank goodness, are you all right? What happened?" Her gaze then fell upon Pip, a tiny figure in the grand drama. Her initial concern gave way to a dawning comprehension, then a look of utter, profound awe. The local fire chief, a gruff but kind man named Frank, approached, his face grim as he assessed the raging inferno. He saw Eleanor, covered in soot, but alive. "Ma'am, are you injured? Did anyone else?" Eleanor shook her head, tears still streaming. She held Pip up slightly, revealing his small, panting form. "No," she croaked, her voice raw. "Just Pip. He saved me. He smelled it. He pulled me out." Chief Frank, a man who had seen many tragedies, looked at the tiny dog, then back at the inferno. He understood the implications. An elderly woman, alone in a burning house, during a blizzard, no power. The odds of survival were almost non-existent. Yet here she was, clutching this tiny creature. He leaned down, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips as he gently stroked Pip's head. "Well, little fella," he murmured, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. "You're a hero, a real hero." The onlookers, a small group of bundled neighbors and first responders, watched the scene unfold. Their initial shock at the fire quickly transformed into profound admiration for the tiny dog. Whispers spread like wildfire through the small, rural community. The little dog saved her. The one that was too small at the shelter. He let her out. The quiet, dismissed puppy, the runt of the litter, had not only survived but had performed an act of incredible bravery, a feat of heroism that none had predicted. The unspoken judgments, the dismissive assumptions, were instantly, irrevocably shattered by the blazing truth of Pip's extraordinary courage. The true measure of worth, they realized, lay not in size or appearance, but in spirit and unwavering loyalty. The charred remains of Eleanor Vance's beloved cottage smoldered in the pre-dawn light, a stark silhouette against the still-falling snow. Firefighters, their faces grim and weary, worked meticulously to extinguish the last embers, their headlamps cutting through the swirling flakes. Eleanor, wrapped in a thick borrowed blanket, sat in the warmth of Mrs. Davies's living room next door, a mug of steaming tea clutched in her trembling hands. Her body ached, but her mind was clear, fixed on the small furry bundle nestled on her lap. Pip, exhausted but safe, was finally asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in soft, even breaths. The initial shock of losing her home was immense, a profound sense of displacement. Every possession, every memory contained within those walls was gone, reduced to ash and rubble. Yet, as she looked at Pip, a quiet gratitude swelled within her, eclipsing the grief. Her life, the most precious possession of all, had been saved by this tiny, rejected creature. News of Pip's heroism spread through the small, rural community like wildfire, carried by the awestruck whispers of the neighbors and the solemn pronouncements of Chief Frank. The story, picked up by local news outlets, quickly captivated the region. "Tiny Runt saves elderly owner from blaze," proclaimed one headline. Rejected puppy becomes unsung hero, declared another. The narrative of the too small dog defying expectations and performing an act of incredible bravery resonated deeply with a public often cynical of grand gestures. The impact on Eleanor's family was immediate and profound. Clara, her daughter, who had previously expressed polite but persistent doubts about Eleanor's ability to care for herself, let alone a troublesome puppy, arrived at Mrs. Davies's house the next morning, her face pale with shock and unshed tears. She rushed to her mother, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Mother, oh mother, I was so worried. And Pip, I can't believe it. He really saved you." Her voice, usually so composed, cracked with raw emotion. The subtle undertone of skepticism, of gentle condescension that had often permeated their conversations was entirely gone, replaced by profound relief and unadulterated awe. Clara knelt beside Eleanor, gently stroking Pip's head as he stirred awake. "He's amazing, Mother. Truly amazing. I was wrong about him, about you needing help with him." Her confession was heartfelt, laced with remorse. "We should have listened more closely when you talked about his cleverness. We just thought you were lonely." She looked at Pip, then back at Eleanor, her eyes glistening. "He's not just a dog, is he? He's family, and a hero." The other family members, including Eleanor's sons who quickly arrived, echoed Clara's sentiments. They were humbled, their well-meaning but often dismissive attitudes shattered by the undeniable proof of Pip's courage. They openly acknowledged their error in judgment, their preconceived notions about his size and Eleanor's capacity for independence. They vowed to be more present, more supportive, no longer viewing Eleanor as frail but as resilient, and Pip as the extraordinary companion he truly was. Their previous misgivings, though born of concern, had blinded them to the unique bond forging between Eleanor and Pip, and they felt a genuine remorse for their earlier dismissals. The community, too, rallied around Eleanor. Donations poured in. Local businesses offered building supplies. Neighbors organized a meal train and volunteered their time to help clear the debris. The Happy Tales Animal Shelter, the very place that had labeled Pip as too small and difficult to adopt, now publicly celebrated his heroism. Sarah, the young volunteer who had helped Eleanor with the adoption, visited with tears in her eyes, expressing her profound pride and regret for having ever doubted him. The shelter launched a Pip's Paw Citive Impact campaign, encouraging the adoption of overlooked animals, changing their internal policies to emphasize temperament and potential oversize or breed. Their past failure to highlight Pip's unique qualities became a powerful lesson in valuing hidden potential. Within a few months, with the overwhelming support of her family and community, a new, smaller, but meticulously designed cottage began to rise from the ashes of the old one. It was built with modern safety features, but retained the charm and warmth that Eleanor cherished. It was not just a house. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of community, and a monument to the tiny hero who had made it all possible. One brisk afternoon, as the last touches were being put on her new home, Eleanor sat on the porch swing, a warm cup of herbal tea in her hand, Pip curled contentedly on her lap, gently snoring. The air smelled of fresh pine and possibility. The silence, once a heavy cloak of loneliness, was now a comforting blanket of peace. "You know, Pip," Eleanor whispered, stroking his soft fur, her voice thick with emotion, "I lost so much that night. Everything I owned. All those memories." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the empty lot where her old cottage once stood. "But you gave me so much more. You gave me back my life. You showed me that courage isn't about being big or strong, but about heart." Pip stirred, lifting his head, his deep brown eyes meeting hers. He licked her hand, a soft, warm gesture of silent understanding. "And you also taught me something else, little one," Eleanor continued, a soft smile playing on her lips. "That sometimes, the things we overlook, the things we dismiss as too small or not enough, are the very things that hold the most extraordinary power. You were my unexpected miracle, Pip, my whispering presence, my silent threat, and ultimately, my triumph." The conversation was not just a monologue from Eleanor to Pip, but a profound reflection on her journey. She had once accepted her quiet, solitary existence, almost a prisoner to her routines and fears. Now she was free. The fire, a terrifying ordeal, had ironically burned away the last vestiges of her self-imposed isolation. She had lost a house, but gained a lifeline, a profound understanding of life's true treasures. The fear of vulnerability that had silently haunted her was replaced by a deep appreciation for the unexpected connections that could emerge from the most unlikely of circumstances. Her heart, once guarded, was now open, filled with gratitude for the tiny hero who had shown her the extraordinary power of the seemingly insignificant. 1 year later, the scent of blooming jasmine mingled with the fresh aroma of baked bread wafting from Eleanor Vance's kitchen. Her new cottage, though smaller than the old one, felt infinitely larger, filled with a warmth that radiated from more than just the modern heating system. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating vibrant potted plants and a colorful quilt draped over a comfortable armchair. The silence, once a heavy presence, was now punctuated by the happy thump-thump-thump of a tail wagging, the soft scuffle of tiny paws on polished wood floors, and Eleanor's own voice, often humming a tune or chatting cheerfully with Pip, who was no longer just a pet, but a profound, almost spiritual extension of herself. Eleanor, at 73, moved with a newfound lightness. The stoic resignation that had once defined her was replaced by a quiet joy, a deep sense of purpose. She wasn't just existing, she was truly living, connected to her community in ways she never had been before. Her children visited more frequently, not out of duty, but out of genuine affection and respect, recognizing the profound transformation in their mother and the extraordinary bond she shared with Pip. They now listened intently to her stories, seeing not just an aging parent, but a resilient woman who had embraced life's unexpected turns. Pip was no longer the runt of the litter. He was a legend in their small town, a local celebrity whose story had been shared in national newspapers and even featured on a popular online news segment. He was the subject of children's books and local art, a symbol of unexpected heroism. Yet, despite the fame, Pip remained Pip, humble, affectionate, and still possessing that uncanny, almost supernatural sensitivity to the world around him. His days were filled with joyful walks, naps in sunbeams, and endless games of fetch with Eleanor, his small size now a beloved characteristic, a testament to his unique courage. But Eleanor and Pip's journey of redemption extended beyond their own quiet lives. Remembering the coldness of Pip's initial rejection and her own struggle with isolation, Eleanor found a new calling. She spearheaded a community initiative, aptly named Pip's Positive Impact, turning the very idea of rejects into a beacon of hope. This was her way of paying it forward, ensuring that other overlooked creatures, and perhaps overlooked people, found their true worth. Once a month, Eleanor and Pip would visit the Happy Tales Animal Shelter, the very place where their journey began. Pip, now a confident and beloved figure, would greet the nervous, wary animals, offering gentle nudges and comforting licks. Eleanor, speaking with a quiet, compelling sincerity that resonated deeply, would share their story with potential adopters, emphasizing the hidden potential in every animal, especially those deemed too old, too shy, or too small. She encouraged families to look beyond superficial appearances and open their hearts to the quiet, often overlooked souls who held immense capacity for love and heroism. Her message extended to the human residents of the town as well. Eleanor became a regular visitor at the local senior center, not just to participate in activities, but to sit and talk with other elderly residents who, like her former self, felt isolated and forgotten. She shared Pip's story, not just as a tale of a dog's bravery, but as a parable for human connection, for the power of reaching out, and for the rediscovery of one's own inherent value, regardless of age or circumstance. She organized companion pet days, bringing shelter animals to the center, facilitating connections that often led to heartfelt adoptions. She advocated for local programs that paired isolated seniors with rescued animals, believing profoundly in the healing power of unconditional love and companionship. Her impact was palpable. The Happy Tales shelter saw a significant increase in adoptions of special needs or older animals. People in the community, inspired by Eleanor's resilience and Pip's courage, started looking at their own lives differently, finding value in the unnoticed, appreciating the quiet strengths that often lay hidden beneath unassuming exteriors. Eleanor's once lonely cottage became a hub of quiet activity, filled with the warmth of genuine connection and the gentle joy of a life truly lived. On a warm summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Eleanor sat on her porch swing. Pip, ever present, lay curled at her feet, a soft sigh escaping him in his sleep. Eleanor looked out at the tranquil landscape, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She thought of the journey she had taken, from a solitary existence to a life rich with purpose and connection, all thanks to a tiny, rejected puppy. The faint sound of children's laughter drifted from a nearby yard, happy and carefree. Eleanor closed her eyes, a gentle smile on her face. In the stillness, she imagined she could hear the faint, beautiful echoes of courage, not just Pip's, but her own, and that of every overlooked soul who dared to show their true worth. It was a symphony of redemption, a testament that the most extraordinary miracles often bloom from the smallest, most unexpected seeds, transforming darkness into light and solitude into a vibrant, interconnected life. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming narratives that delve into the profound human spirit and the power of unseen heroes. Thank you for joining our journey.